on. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Ooh, that's good. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1. That's good. I never know what stuff gets turned off, what I have to turn back on. So it's I think I've got it working now. If you'll notice, I've posted the video link in the channel. That's just so that if you want to go back to watch this later on today, you can easily click on it and then just watch the recording. Okay, so I'll introduce myself first. I'm Carl. I haven't taught you yet. I was away for your first week, and last week I was teaching the other cohort. So this is our first time together. A few things out of the way. I like to get feedback from people on the lectures, the work that we're doing, and I want to just make sure that even if you're not comfortable giving it to me in person, that you talk to Davey, give him feedback for me, and then it can come to me private or like anonymously. That's okay too, just so I can hear whether or not things are going a little too fast or too slow. That's one thing, if the information seems relevant to you. But the main thing is, if you can, just let me know during the lecture. It's okay if someone says, this is going a little bit too slow for me, and we can try and figure out where the gaps are. So before we get started, this is the first time doing this lecture here, so I haven't actually posted the notes online yet, and normally I like to send them out beforehand. So I would have liked to send these out to you last night, but what I'll do is we'll push them to get right now, so if you want, you can follow along with them rather than having to take notes yourself. I mean, if you want to take notes, take notes. Sometimes it helps people remember things, but I also don't want you to feel like you have to do that. So I've got this repo here. It's all the test code that we're going to be doing today, the live code we're going to be doing today, but also this README file with all of the notes in it that I'll also send out afterwards. So we can initialize our Git repository. I haven't done that yet, so that's the first thing. I'll make this bigger. All right. So is that big enough in the back for people to see it? Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I'll also, well, we can test this one as well now. Kind of like that, okay? Okay, sweet. Oh, if you want to, just let me know and I'll make it bigger. I'll zoom in more. Okay, so now I have my Git repo here. I haven't committed anything, but I just want to make sure that I am committing only the things that I want. So I'm going to type git status in and take a quick look through here. And these all look like files that I want to commit for my first commit. I've got git ignore here, so something tells me that's helping me out a little bit. My git ignore has node modules, environment file, my VS Code, and DS store file. So just the kind of the stuff that I remember every time that I needed to put in here. So I'm going to add all this stuff. And since I've added this, I don't just commit at this point, right? I'm going to do a quick status check to make sure that I was right, that nothing hidden in those folders is going to get committed that I didn't want to. So here's a whole bunch of, yeah, this looks like this stuff is OK for me to commit. So I'm happy with that. Now I actually do the commit. Actually, you know what mine is? I do it a little bit differently. All right. So now I've committed my first commit. I'm going to push this to my repo, which I've already created here. Remember, they say down at the bottom, this is how you can set it up so that your repo can be pushed remotely. And all it is I'm taking this remote GitHub repository and I'm going to make it a remote repository for myself now. So I can either copy this link from here or from up here. I can copy the whole thing if I want to. But let's talk about these commands quickly because they're quite useful. So I'm just going to copy the hard part, which is the link to where I want to post this. And I'm going to say git remote add. So this is a remote repo. So git remote is the command I would make. I want to add a remote repo to my existing repo, so I'm going to add it. And I'm going to name it origin. That's just kind of an arbitrary name we can give it, but origin is conventional, so we'll do that. And I'll paste that here. And so now when I do a git remote -v, which is just going to list out all my remote repos, I can see that I successfully added my GitHub repo, so I can git push origin, and it's just the master branch that I have now. So I'll push that up as well. Now I go back, And all those notes should now be available to you so you can follow along. So it's under github.com/Jensen crud-notes. Yeah. Yeah, it does the same. It ends up being the same thing. I just did it the other way because most people don't notice that, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, and I figured instead of me doing it quickly before I started the lecture, 5 minutes before, I would have just taken you through it. So. Yeah, if you do a clone and then you do git remote -v, you'll see your origin repo as being your GitHub repo, and that's all that was happening. It happens for you that way. Okay. So these notes are here now. Jensen, yeah, Jensen. Sometimes this happens. The first time I didn't get a chance to test these out, so my one of them worked. One of the emojis worked, but not the other one. It's okay. Well, not deployment notes. This one's CRUD notes. So the deployment ones would be for a different lecture. Yeah, no problem. So we'll find all the notes on there. Under the README for CRUD notes, yep. And it should just be on that first page. Okay. So now we got that out of the way, I've got to talk a little bit about some of the sort of terminology and concepts that we need to know about before we can start writing code that will allow us to create the creation, the retrieval or the reading of resources, the updating, so changing existing resources, or the removal of resources from a server. I've talked about some terms. So this is sort of your week 3, day 2, and we're going to go through these topics, the first 4 quite quickly, and then we'll spend most of our time actually implementing these types of features in an application, a Node application using Express. And so it's going to be a little bit of review from yesterday, right? Because yesterday we started using Express to build web applications. So I'm going to be building on top of what we did yesterday. Resources. Resources could be pretty much anything, any noun. A lot of times when people do this lecture, they'll say, class, give me a noun. And then that noun is used as the resource that we talk about that day, that we can perform different actions on. We can create them. We can read them. We can update them or delete them, those CRUD operations. Here are some other resources. I just thought the icons looked nice, so I put them up there. They look tasty. A cookie, if I wanted to track cookie or cookies, then I could do that. Pie or pies, a collection of pies, each pie being its own resource. And same for cupcakes. I got a list of cupcakes, or I can create cupcakes. I can delete them from my list, my menu, or whatever it is, my bakery site. So these resources are just examples. Chairs, monitors, all these things can all be examples of resources. Today, what we're going to be working on is your kind of. Thank you very much. I really just wanted to. I've been looking for 2.5 years to be able to say the Bob Loblaw Loblog in a lecture a lot, and it's going to happen a lot, I think. So I decided to make a blog today because CRUD is blogs and CRUD go together like I think cookies and pie and cupcakes. They're really. This is a lot of the web is this type of a website, right? One that you can create some sort of a post, maybe. I didn't call it a post because with HTTP we post things, so to post a post is kind of confusing. So instead I called it an article. That's my resource. Things like article is not bad, cupcake's not bad, but people and person, people, that's not great. We want to probably stay away from those types of nouns, ones that don't pluralize well with just by adding an S to it. Goose and geese, that kind of thing. We want to try and find other ways to maybe describe those things. So users, customers, students, those are pretty good resources. I don't have to deal with that kind of a problem. Because there's convention that we use. When we start talking about our routes, for example, we pluralize our routes, the resource inside of our routes. And so it's a lot easier if all we do is have to add an S to it all the time. It makes it easier to write software around it and predict it and all that kind of thing. So that kind of stuff. So we've got our resource. Again, could be anything. In our case, we're going to be using an article. And an article or any resource has properties that describe it. Right? So the properties that I have that describe an article are the title of the article, the date that the article was written, and then the content of the article. These are the properties that describe an article. I'll be collecting these together in JavaScript using an object and passing those things around and then using them to display on a website. Does that make sense? Okay. So our resources in JavaScript usually will be, well, our collection of resources will usually be an array of objects where each object is an article with an ID, a title, a date, and content. And I said here, every resource has to have a unique identifier. Okay, let's do that. Let's make sure every resource has a unique identifier. So ID, title, and content, that's what we'll be dealing with my blog posts. With cookies and pies and cupcakes, it could be the filling, it could be the properties, it could be the size of them. They could be mini cupcakes or large ones, and they could be, mini pies are kind of cool, so that we could have as well. But every pie would have its own ID, every cookie would have its own ID. And so this is how we keep track of things. Make sense? Okay. So let's go through the importance or sort of the significance of these terms, because that's what this is all about today. It's about doing these things using Express. First one is create. If I have an article and if I have a collection of articles but I haven't created any yet, then my collection is empty, so no one can do any reading, updating, or destroying of anything. So create is quite important. I don't think it doesn't have to be at the top of I guess at the beginning of the acronym, but it helps here. So create is the first one we're going to talk about. When I create a new resource, I have a title, I have the date, and I have content. But what I don't have yet is a unique identifier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the data that I do have to a system. In our case, it's a web server. And this web server is going to intelligently apply a unique identifier to that resource. So now there's 4 properties, including the ID. And then it's going to send some sort of response that says, this was successful, we've created this thing, or this was a failure, or there's an error. That's normally how this works with a server. Every time, yeah, so creating thing is making it available on the server, and something that didn't exist before. The second thing is read, and read is boring and interesting at the same time, because it's kind of boring because it's static. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't make anything new or different. But it does allow us to gain access to what's there already. And so a read operation, that can come in a whole bunch of different ways. It could be I list out all of the articles on the front page. That could be one way that we perform a read operation. Maybe what I want to do is go and look. I click on one of those lists, one of the links in the list, by clicking on the title of the blog post. And when I do that, it goes and it takes me to one specific blog post. That specific blog post I wanted to look at, I can read it. That's a read operation. It's just grabbing data from the server and presenting it back to the user. Maybe the third common situation would be I perform a search. So instead of a whole list of all the resources, I could do a read operation that gives me a filtered list of the resources. And in that case, the search I'd be able to give it a term, and it would give back to me just the items I was interested in. Update, so it's changing something that exists already. If I have an article on the server and I've made a mistake, the title is not right, then what I want to be able to do is make a request that allows me to change that title to something different while maintaining the resource with that identifier, keeping that the same. So an update is really originally this was a replacement of the resource entirely on the server. Nowadays we might just send 1 or 2 pieces of data that might change. Maybe just add like an updated at field as well. Any questions about that so far? And then destroy, this is the removal of a resource. And in this case, in the case of reading a specific resource, updating a resource, or destroying a resource, we need to know the ID of that resource to do that, to perform that operation. I need to know which resource I want to remove before I can ask the server to remove it. So that unique identifier is really important for those types of operations. Cool? Okay. So a route, this is, yes? Yes, please.
Just on the read, you always going to be making like a search or filter or something on the list of objects that you have on the resource, right? It's not about accessing a new page or something like that. It's more about just filtering out your list of objects.
Yeah, so there's a few ways. We're talking mostly about servers in this case, so I'm not going to shy away from that. We'll talk about servers specifically and say, if I make a request to a web server, I can do it in a way that says I want to do a read operation. I want to retrieve data, and I can pass information on that retrieval, something like maybe a search term, and then the server can take that search term and handle it the way that it wants to. Now, if it decides to do a filtered query on the database and only retrieve the articles with certain words in it or something like that, then it will do that, and it'll send me back that data on that request. So in my browser, I make a request, something like, I'll show you here. Maybe up here, I do blah 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 .com / I can say I want to make a search, and then the search here, this is data that can be passed to the server that it can use to figure out what I want to look for. This is what it would look like in the browser. As I would hit enter here, it would make the request to the server, and I'd get that data back, and then it would render that data with this URL. That's kind of what I got from your question. Is there anything else I could add? Yeah. Okay, cool. So now we have these operations we want to perform. We also have to talk about how do we do this with a web server, because we're trying to bridge this gap. And you've done this already. You've started this work with Express, where you're designing routes. You're designing the routes that your server can handle. So when I make this request to create this resource, the server knows how to do that. So a route is defined here as a method plus a path. So here, a GET request on / articles. Well, that's how we tell the server what we need, but the server is where the behavior is defined. That's where we actually write the code, the logic that will do what's meant to be done, maybe a database request lookup, and then send that data back as a chunk of HTML that's been rendered to an EJS file. This is all stuff that can happen. That could be the behavior that happens. So with web servers, the route is attaching a method and a path to a behavior. So that's really what writing Express servers is about. Cool. I know this is kind of a weird thing. Questions about this? Okay. So we got to learn how to choose a method. Because choosing a method, anybody know what I mean by this? If we're making all these requests, yes?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. You want to share?
So,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, but I assume
we're just using get, post,
and
so good. So you mentioned the other methods here. So we got get and post is what we're going to be using mostly today. But you also have put and delete. And then there's a whole bunch of other ones that we don't need to learn about even this week. Not as important to us for these purposes. But just know the list is bigger than just 4. So we have all these methods, and what we need to do is, when we want some sort of a behavior, we need to identify what that behavior is, and then attach a method to it. And we can do that by understanding a few sort of categories of behavior. Okay, so if our behavior, that what happens in that Express handler, if it doesn't change the state of the server, then we'll say that's a safe operation. Okay? An unsafe operation makes the server different than it was before the operation happened. So let's remember this term, the concept safe or unsafe. Is anybody unclear on this? Because I won't move on until we're all good on this. The concept of server and an operation being safe or unsafe. Okay, we're good. Okay, good. So we understand that. So body is another thing that we have to think about when we're trying to sort of design which method we're going to use. So if we need to pass data to the operation for it to be able to do things, for example, creating a new article, if I need to pass it the title and the content and the date, then I want to do that on the body, most likely. And it's not a safe operation. Well, okay, so the body, that means there are some requests that we make where body data is sort of implied that we have it, that we use body data. So this is just, I'll show you an actual example of this in the Chrome Dev Tools when we get to that. So this last one, which is kind of confusing, is idempotent. See? Does anybody? Yes. Doing a multiple change, yeah. So after the first initial change, then making the same request or having the same operation again over and over will not change it further. So that's what we're talking about here. Is everyone good with this? Okay. Well, there are just some operations or behaviors that are inherently idempotent. Things where, let's say that I have an article, and so I already have this resource on my server, and I want to take this article and I want to change the title. So I do an update operation, and I replace the existing article with a new article with a different title. That's the first time it has changed, right? The second time I do that same request, nothing has changed because it changed from the same thing to the same thing. So in that case, it's idempotent. So there's operations like that that we want to behave like that, and other operations where we want it to change the server every single time. Cool? All right. So here's our trusty choosing our method matrix. Along the left side is our methods, and along the top are those different sort of qualities of a behavior that we have. And so if we need to do a safe operation, which method would I use? Yeah, it's the only option, right? So we could just look at this chart and figure out, okay, well, our behavior, or the operation has to be safe. Get is what we choose. I don't care that get is idempotent. That's not really relevant to me. You go online and it says it is. I don't really think much about that. But I do think that's important for the difference between post and put, for example. So if I have an operation which is meant to create a new resource every time, for example, uploading photos, that would be, I want to be creating this new photo resource every time. I should be using post for that, because it's not an idempotent operation. Making that same request over and over will upload the same photo over and over and over. Whereas, again, if I want to actually replace the existing photo, that could be a different operation, and that would be idempotent. So I would probably use put for that. Both of those operations, when I'm posting or putting data onto the server, those are really good for body data. And you know what? I made a mistake here. Where's my mistake? It's not technically a mistake, but I'm going to fix it anyways. Get and delete optionally can have body, but I've never done it. I don't know. Have you done body on a GET request? No. If you look on Wikipedia, it says it's optional. I'm just going to try to make it easy on us here and say no. And the same with delete. Oh, so the response definitely has a body. We're talking about the request. Oh, thank you for that's good clarification, right? That we're talking about the request here, not the response. The response will have a body, or if it doesn't have a body, then I sure hope that status code tells us that that body is empty, that there's nothing there, with something like no content, for example, right?
I'm a little confused on the difference, I guess, between
Idempotent, yeah. I think it's idempotent.
idempotent and safe, because if making more than one request is kind of like it has the same effect, and I guess that's on the server, so
because like you could make multiple get requests to get different data.
Mm-hmm.
So those would be indemnable permissions. But it seems like from what you showed the definitions, it's just not changing the state of the server. So in that case, multiple requests wouldn't change the state of the server.
That's why I said so. Even though I think what you're saying is, even though there's a little confusion between Git and safety and idempotent, right? Yeah. So that's why I don't really. I mean, I would be happy just to do this, and tell you all that Git is not idempotent because it doesn't change anything the first time. Like I'd be happy to say that because that's how I perceive it, right? So a lot of this stuff is kind of complicated because there's a specification which isn't. It's a little wordy, but it's not actually too hard to get if you really spend a couple times reading these definitions. And we don't necessarily use it exactly in the way that it's described in the specification. So that's why I'm saying with some of these things, like whether or not get and delete have a body, whether or not it's optional or not, it's mostly in practice that we just don't do it, that we don't tend to send data on the body. In terms of the GET requests, the difference between idempotence and safety, I don't necessarily consider GET to be idempotent because it does not change anything the first time, or the second time, or the third time. Yes?
Just an aside, I don't know if this is even relevant, but like, so in the situation with GET and delete, are there potentially situations where you providing stuff within body can affect what GET and delete do? Like, would passing information through the body manipulate the end result of GET and delete?
It's a good question. So yeah, so the question is, if we wanted to pass data to the server on a GET or a delete, are we not able to do that? Is that something that's not useful? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Is it like, is it possible and is it useful? So like, I am assuming it is possible, but it's not very useful.
What you're going to find is that most people do it and they need to do it, but they don't do it on the body for a GET and a delete or a delete. What they would do is actually include it as part of the query string in the URL, right? So let's say that you did a delete and you wanted to redirect the user to some referral URL or something like that. You wanted to keep track of a URL that could redirect, so you could redirect the user after the delete was done. Chances are that's coming on the actual path bar in the location or on the URL itself, not in the body.
You wouldn't package it within the...
I don't believe that's common. I don't know anyone who does it, and I've never seen it done like that. Yeah, I mostly see. And for a GET request, the same thing. You put a search with a term on the URL, not on the body. That's why I'm saying here, don't even bother with it. Yeah. Does that make sense? It's kind of a weird thing because I'm telling you, to do things that maybe are not specification or against the specification, but I'm also telling you to do things that match reality in what I'm seeing. Okay? Yes.
I'm still a little confused. Like, how is something like put can be
Idempotent, yeah. Well, so let me go through the next couple of slides, and then we'll move on, okay?
All right.
Or then we'll come back to it if it's still a problem, yeah. Because I do have some more visuals to try and help with us. So if I want to do a create, is a create safe? No, right? Do we want body data? Do we normally pass something to the server? Yes, we do. It is not idempotent. So based on this, we're going to use a post because it matches those criteria. And this is what happens to the server every time we make this request. So let's say we take one request, and the server starts in state A. We make the request to the server. The server now has an additional resource on it. So now we're in state B, right? We've changed from state A to state B. If I take that exact same request, and I make it again to the server, then now I'm in state C because it now has two resources on it rather than just the one. Okay, so this is non-idempotent. This is what post is meant for, these types of operations. So that's why we say create, because usually this is good for creating things. Yeah.
So like in this scenario, it doesn't overwrite something, it just adds another.
That's correct.
With a unique ID.
Yep. So adds another thing with another unique identifier, because we do not, when we create something, we do not necessarily know the ID. We could maybe, but we don't necessarily. That might come from that. Most of the time, that comes from the server. Yes. Yeah. So, it's a good question. So do we change behavior? Because I think that happens in the behavior part of the route, right? That we can check to see whether or not the user should make a change or not. We could check to see. There's I had another thing in mind. I'll remember it, but oh yeah, for checking to see, for example, if I create a new user account, then I have a new user. If I create a new user account with that same email address, well then I don't have a second user. I shouldn't have two users with the same email address. So in a way, that's kind of like creating a resource with an existing ID, and we won't actually be replaced. I don't know. It's that example is more of an idempotent operation. But then it gets kind of confusing because should we use post or put for a login? Let's not worry about that today. Let's just choose one of them and kind of get familiar with connecting these things together with Express, because we're going to be able to get away with get and post for all of today, and really focus in on how do I write the code that actually does the behavior that I want in the application. We want to worry about edge cases. We want to make them work, and then we want to understand them by getting them to work and then looking back on them, I think, as well, right? So we're going to come at it from two different sides. I'm trying to teach from one side, which is introducing these concepts, but I think that it's the activity work that you're going to be doing on TinyApp, and also maybe some of the work we do in the live coding that helps fill some of these gaps in. We can always bring these back up. We can always talk about it again if we need to. Oh, this is a mistake. What's my mistake? I rushed last night, right? I didn't even fix this one. I just copied and pasted it. Okay. No body. Yeah. Okay, here we go. So that is, we're going to say no body. We don't need it for a read. Is it idempotent or not? I don't know. Yes-y, nosy, right? Yes-y, nosy. So, maybe optionally. Or no, maybe not. Doesn't make any change when we first make the call, so it's safe. That's all that matters to me with with the read operation, is that it's safe. Because if it's safe, we want to use get. Pretty straightforward. This is what it looks like. Our server doesn't change no matter how many of these requests we make. Cool? Okay. So update. Update is not safe, right? We don't, because we're changing the state of the server. At least the first time we make the request, we're changing the state of the server. There is more normally body data. That's how we're going to pass maybe a new title or new content. And then an update also is idempotent because, again, if I have a resource and I replace it with a resource under the same ID, then I have a new state. That's my first change. That's the initial change. But after that, making that exact same request again, we'll just keep replacing the same resource with the same resource, so it's idempotent. So that's why we use put for that, yes? That is a prerequisite. It must be the same request over and over for this to matter, because if I did one request with some data and another request with other data, okay, good. That's good clarity as well, right?
Always, whenever we're referring to idempotent, it's saying that you would be making the exact same request.
Yeah, it has to be that exact same request with the same. Good, perfect. I'm glad that's come together. Good. Yes. Yeah.
So the next layer to that is like the difference is update and create is the identifier. So you're passing an identifier to update, whereas create you're not.
That's normally correct. Yeah, normally we do not pass an identifier to create. We pass one to update, and that's because we're saying no. We're keeping this ID. And it should represent the same resource. It just has different properties now. That's all we're changing is the properties underneath it. And so that's idempotent. So we'll use a put for that because it's what falls under these categories. Remember, we're just matching it back to this matrix, right? And then we've got, so this is what put looks like. The exact same put request. This is only one put request being made here, twice though. A goes to B. That's the first change. And then B goes to B, goes to B, goes to B. That's idempotency. Cool? So delete is what we'll use for destroy. We normally don't have body data. It is not safe, but it is idempotent. Delete and destroy go together quite well. So let's say it looks like this. My server has the resource. I delete the resource with a request. I now do not have that resource, so I have a state of B. And then I take that existing resource, or I try and delete the resource again. This even highlights it even better than update, I think, is that I've deleted the resource, and then I make the request to delete that resource again. Well, the server doesn't change at all because the resource is just gone still. It's not. There's no change to be made. So that's again idempotency. Cool. Three things we care about when we're choosing a method: safety, body, idempotency. And I think safety is number one. Safety is the most important thing when choosing a method. If you're just choosing between get and post, think about safety, and then your decision's been made. So how do we make these types of requests with the browser? There's lots of different options. When we type into the location bar, we do a get request, always. When we refresh, we click the refresh button, we get it does a get request for us. When we click on a link, an href link kind of thing, that's a get request. When I submit a form, it could be a get request. It could also be a post request. So today, this is how we're going to be doing our post requests, is by submitting forms on web pages. Also, whenever we load a file from somewhere else, so an external resource, I'm using the term resource in this case to be a file on the web server, something like a JavaScript file or a CSS file or an image file. Those would all be other types of resources that we can do get requests to get the data for, and then the browser renders those things. The other way we do it, and where we're going to be taking all of this later on next week, is with XHR. So get, post, put, and delete they all come with pretty much the same ease of use when it comes to using XHR, which is really AJAX. So next week is client-side JavaScript, single-page applications, and using AJAX to make requests to the server. In that case, that's when you should definitely start using put and delete. This week, I'm cool with just using get and post. All right. Went a little bit longer than I'd hoped, but we'll see. Maybe we make up for it near the end. I also don't know how long it's going to take me to live code this. So I'll run the app first. I'll just run this app first. So npm start will run my app. I'm using a tool here called NodeMon. And NodeMon is going to reset the app every time I make a change. So every time I change the code, it's going to reset this application. And just so everyone knows, I'm running NodeMon with -L for legacy mode. This is not required for me to run it, but it is required to run it using the virtual machine. So if you're in Vagrant, using Vagrant to create a virtual machine, then you would use -L for legacy polling mode to enable legacy polling. Yeah.
So this is able to see that you've made changes to a file dynamically, and then just refreshes once you save it.
Yeah. So I'll show you quickly what that looks like. I'm going to go into my and I'm watching the source index file. So I'm going in here. Here's my index file. And when I change, I don't know, anything really, and I'm going to save it now, we see that it actually said restarting due to changes, and then starting node source index again, and then it puts my program output there, yes?
Are you able to chain multiple files into like NodeMon-L source index? Are you able to chain multiple files so that it tracks multiple files, or is that?
It's a good question. So the question is, can I chain multiple files together, or can I do NodeMon on multiple files? NodeMon is like Node in the sense that I run one application at a time, but it will listen for changes. For example, let's see here. In all of my dependencies, right? So all of the code that indexing it depends on also is being paid attention to. Cool? So this app's going to run on localhost 3000. Here it is. It's just a blog. It should be easy to kind of understand. This is unfortunately hard to read. I might make that bigger for next time. It says create article over here. So this is the finished app. And what I'm going to do is kind of just walk you through it so that we can kind of see how we're going to approach this. So I've got one page here. This is my index page. It's also my home page. It ends up it has the root path. Oops, root path right here. It could do that. Oops. Ugh. It could do that, but it's sort of unnecessary. It's just implied. What we see in the browser bar doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly what's being sent to the server. For example, we don't see a port. It doesn't mean there's no port being used. It just means that it's implied. The server can make those decisions for you. So just like that, here it's when I just put in no /, the server just assumes I mean the root. So I'm making a GET request to /. How do I know this? There's these tools in here that I can use to find out all about this. Hey, it's responsive. Nice, huh? That Bob. Those pictures go away when they don't have room for them anymore. Wow. Yeah, great. Okay. Yay. Okay, so here's my network tabs. I'm going to live in here. This is where I like to live when I'm working on websites because all of my HTTP requests are going to go through this tool. Here, I hit enter in the address bar. What type of request gets made when I do an enter? A little louder, please. Get, yes, thank you. I make my GET request. We have to be careful when we're using this tool because I actually have it filtered for XHR, which means I have been doing some single page application stuff. I'm going to go over to all instead. There it is, all this stuff down here. These are all the requests that get made when I hit enter on the address bar, the location bar up there. The first request that's made is localhost. It is a GET request, just like you said, to / on this host here. So localhost is my host, port 3000, and the path that I'm using is /. And then I make a GET request, and it comes back and says everything's OK, and it sends me this data here, which is HTML generated from an EJS file. Cool? All right. The request headers here, they're not so interesting, but we can see right here, that is the request. But this is what gets sent to the server. The browser makes it look nice, it's fancy. Typing into an address bar is cool. But this is what happens when we actually do that, right? This is what gets sent to the server, and the server knows what this means. It knows what get / means. What's the behavior? What would be the behavior for get / if we look at this website right now? Sorry? Load the home page, but it doesn't just send me a blank page, right? Right, and then what is the EJS file? What kind of behavior does it have? Yep, parse my articles. Render it, yeah. And it renders them in a list one at a time, right? So it'll render each one out in my EJS file. So I would say the behavior of this, my route is get /, and the behavior that route provides is send me back my index EJS file where it has computed or it has found all of my blog posts and then rendered all of those out in a list. And then giving me all that HTML, and this is the HTML that I see here, and this is how the route decided to do it. It creates an article for every single blog post, and it has 3 articles here. I can try and make that a little bit bigger as well. Oh. Yeah, for sure. We're going to do it. We're going to start writing this. Yeah. I just really like to show what it's like at the end before we go and build it, rather than me building something and you being like, I wonder what that looks like. Yeah. This way you know exactly what we're building, and I can just show you how to get there, right? So you can start to build up questions about how things can be done on here. You could ask them immediately. We'll cover that.
Show him the workflow. Show him where we're ending up. He's way on top of the feedback.
Yeah. KV sent me a message late last night, right?
That's why you had to change your.
That's why I was up till 1:30. Yeah. And that's why we're all going to be 15, 20 minutes late on this one. But that's okay. This is fun. Okay, let's. I'm definitely going to write the code for this. I'm going to delete all the stuff that we need to do ourselves, we'll leave the CSS in there, and we'll leave the database stuff because that's just an object with some functions. But we'll talk about how I put this all together, and we're focusing mostly on Express. That's the goal, is to focus on the Express stuff, and then also EJS and the forms, how we deal with forms. Cool? All right, so as I go through, we'll just kind of take a look at a few of these requests. I'm going to click on the Create Article page. And that, again, what kind of a request does clicking on a link do? GET request, that's right. And so I've done a GET request now, and I'm at /articles/new. This is just the route that I've decided to use so that my server understands it needs to render a form for me. The form is what I'm going to use to create the new post. So there's actually, when I create something on my server, I'm going to represent that as two different routes. One route sends the server, it's a GET request that sends the server HTML that has a form in it. And when I click this button down here, new post request from live. Cool. So here, I'm going to click this button, and now it's going to do the second request, which is a post request. Right? That's the only way we do post requests in the browser right now, because we're not doing JavaScript, is through this form. And so when I submit this form, this button here, that's what happens. I did a post request to /articles. Now, it's /articles. Why is it /articles that I do a post request to? What information does the server need when I do this create? When I do this create operation? The route, yeah, I mean, this is the route. So the route is technically post on /articles.
Logic for adding that post that you made into your object database happens inside that route.
Right, and the reason, yes, so everything there is correct. The last little bit, I need to tell it what kind of behavior I want. But the way I tell it that is because it's the article resource that I'm dealing with. Like, I need to say /articles because I'm working with articles. If I only had one kind of resource, I wouldn't necessarily need to do that. But if I have 50 different types of resources, articles and comments, for example, I need to differentiate between these things. When I create a comment, for example, on an article, then I do a post on /comments, maybe, right? Or maybe I need to, yeah, there's more complexity that can come with that. But I need to differentiate between the different resources that I'm dealing with. And so I'm creating an article right now. So my request is post /articles. I can look at the raw request data right here. And we see this is exactly what gets sent to the server. And there's a route that handles that has the behavior that we're going to write that knows how to send the data to this, actually store the data in the database and then make it available. The last thing that happens is this post request did something very interesting. It sent us back this status code 302. What does that status code 302 mean? Yeah, it's a redirect. Because I don't want to render when I post to a form. I want it to redirect to a page that does render. Cool? So all of my post requests are going to end in a redirect, which will cause a GET request to ultimately happen. Make sense?
So it gets chained. Like you're sending a post, and then the GET gets automatically chained after the
Yeah, let me talk about that a bit more in detail. To something that causes a GET request, yes.
Is that do you do that within like the redirect? Like, you know how you do like all the redirects, like what to do if this is done?
Yep. Yeah, you choose there. So in this case, where did I redirect to? Yeah, back to the index, and that's a GET operation to list those pages out, and it makes sense. Why not, when I create a new post, go back to the page that has that post, so that, or I have another option. I could go to that specific post, maybe. That's another option, right? But I made it simple on myself here, and I just went back to the index page. So we have one piece, which is this status code 302 tells the browser that the server would like it to go somewhere else. Okay. If we don't do this, you know what happens? If we render from a post, when you refresh the page, you get a pop-up that says, "Are you sure you want to resubmit the form data?" Have you ever had that before? Yeah, we've all seen it, right? And that's because someone has rendered from a post request. So when you refresh, it's like, well, we have this form data still. We're going to resend this to the server. Are you sure you want to do that? Because it could create another resource, but it doesn't say that extra part, right? So 302 found, yeah. Yeah.
For that, since you're undivided post, I'm just trying to think about the chart we had earlier to get
Mm-hmm.
that would be not safe.
So creating a new post, definitely not safe.
Yeah, if you were to refresh.
Exactly. And it could create the same thing again, right? That's if it did the operation and then sent back, then rendered after. If it didn't do the operation but it still rendered, then maybe it's not going to behave like that. But that starts to get scary because we don't know what it's going to do. Yeah. So what we do instead is we just redirect to another page. And so here, this is one important part of the redirect. So 302, and this tells the browser. The browser knows when it gets a 302 that on the user's behalf, it's going to make another request. But it needs to know where, right? It doesn't know where to make that request, so we have to tell it. We look down here in the request headers. We don't just get it. The response headers. The response headers come back from the server, and it says, "Yeah, I speak your language, HTTP 1.1. I found here's the status code I'm going to send you, which is 302. We've moved this page maybe permanently or whatever. It's permanently and temporary, but don't get too worried about that. We found the page, okay. But this is the second important part. This is how the response tells the browser where it should redirect to. This one's not super exciting because it's just /. That's our index page. But if I wanted it to redirect to the page that the post is on, then I would need to know the ID of the post, which I know because I just created it on the server. And when I send the redirect, it would be to /articles /1 or /articles /2. That would just be what I'd send it as the location here instead. So this location just has either the relative URL, another place on this site, which is this is relative to the site. Or if I put http/google.com whatever as a redirect, then it will redirect to me to a completely another site completely. You're going to be using this with TinyApp, right? You're going to be redirecting people to other sites completely when they use your tiny link to go to their long link, I guess.
As long as you match the location to an actual address, you don't have to add anything else. Like, as long as it's just like the HTTP whatever, it's fine.
You need to make sure. I mean, you don't have to, but you should make sure you're redirecting to good links. You just need to put any URL in as a location. Yeah, and
like you don't need to add like a prefix or anything to say that it's going somewhere else. Like it's
no. Yeah, the location should just contain a URL like you would type into your address bar, because that's what the browser is doing, is it's taking that, putting it into the address bar for you, and making the request for you. Now, I think it's possible that you could redirect to a page that redirects, but that's not a concern of ours. If we redirect to a page that redirects, then that redirect will redirect somewhere else. But that sometimes happens. So just kind of use redirects wisely. Try not to get into redirection loops. That's redirect to this page, and that page redirects you back. I've seen it in an assistance request before. It's okay. I mean, it happens, but just keep in mind, infinite loops can happen with this stuff. Yes.
So more like if we create a new post there, like this, and then we got redirect to the homepage,
Yeah.
then they will be in the header, right? Like the location stuff.
That's right. The location is in the header of this response.
What if we just visit the homepage directly, and in the header there will not be such a location there. So if we redirect to the header,
Yep.
to the homepage, and if we visit the homepage directly, the header part can be different.
So the question is there a difference between the location header or the existence of a location header if we make the request, or if the request comes through from a redirect compared to if I put the address in the bar? And there is a difference that I only expect to see a location header if it's a redirect. I don't expect it to see any other for any other reason. And let's also quickly look here at articles. So I made the request to post the article, right? But I got a redirect back. So my browser made another request, which is right here. This is the second request now. See? First request, and then second request. And the second request is a GET request to /. So this is what happened when I got the redirect in the browser, is my browser went and made a request to local. Now, in here, there is no location in the response, in this response, because this is a OK GET request, right? It's OK, it's not redirect. So there is no location in this response, only in the one that has a redirect with it. Cool? Yeah. Oh, I'll go hand up first, and then we can come back. Yeah. A method list.
Meta?
Method?
Method?
All the, you remember yesterday you mentioned something about whenever you make a get or a post, whatever, it goes into a list.
I was defining, so when I was talking about that table that I do on the whiteboard, I was defining the routing table. Oh, this idea of Express having a bunch of different routes that we defined in the earlier slide, which a route is equal to a path, a method, and then a behavior, and I have those three columns. Anytime a request comes in, let's look at that table, see which route is actually related.
Is that like in the index you're talking about?
Is that in the index?
Like that would be coming from the index. So like you'd have the index file that would have all these things that it would parent to a table.
You're going to break it into multiple files, but it would be coming from your Express code that's doing app.get. So you can split that into different files. But let's say it was in one file.
Yeah.
Like in Tiny, it would be from your index.
I get that.
Sorry for that.
No, it's great. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So this tool is all about debugging these requests on the client side and just looking at the data for these requests on the client side. Yeah. Cool. Every other request also comes in. We can see the styles that was made as a request because it tried to load that file from the web server. So we have a well, actually, I guess we'll just look at the view source here. It's a GET request to /CSS /styles.css. So I'm importing that file into my document as well. And it gets its own GET request, just like the font file and all the other stuff, all the other resources that are linked to in my document.
Is this all sequential? Like this is like the order that it's going through?
The question is it sequential? And it is. It's sequential based on how this HTML is parsed from the top of the tree all the way down. OK? Yeah, and it will make a request when it finds an element like that. Yeah.
Why are you saying it's VO2 on that initial post then if you're like just, you're not like, and then you have that second request when you're doing a get.
Yeah.
Does articles not exist?
Well, so when I create a new article, right, the whole purpose of that, the whole behavior of that route, post on /articles, is to create a new resource on the server. And then the server needs to tell the client again how it did. Did it do it or not? Right? So I want to answer this right. I want to answer this well for you because I saw it happen before with the Enlightenment, right? So I just need to take the right approach. So okay, so with the create, I've got this form here. Yeah, please. Yeah. 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 No, I was going to do it right after this set of questions. Yeah. Yeah. So okay, so the question is, we'll finish it with this question. We'll take the break and then come back and we'll start doing the coding. So you asked about creating the resource on the server, right? That is, and whether or not it's there or not, or why there's a redirect, why we got that 302, why we made another request afterwards. That's kind of the flow of what we're talking about here.
Because I don't know the code, but I'm assuming you didn't do
Well, my post does a redirect. So we can look at the code. So it's no problem. We can look at it. What we're going to do with this is okay, so we need to first thing we need to do is find the route that we're looking for the behavior of, right? Which is the route that takes care of the creation of a article resource. So what route should we be looking for? What method, what path?
Sorry, we're on the get now or we're on the post?
We're talking about creating a resource.
Okay, we're
Posting, 100%. So it's going to be an app.post. I don't need to worry about any of the app.gets, right? So it's going to be an app.post. Well, there's one. Here's an app.post. So what is the next thing that I need to do to define that I'm talking about making this behavior occur? The path, right? So it's got the method, we got the path. So here is the path. So this here is the route that I need to, that is called when someone submits a form and does a post request to my server. The behavior is all defined inside this function here. And what it does is it creates an article resource, which is just an object that has a bunch of properties in it. Here, ID, title, content, and date. This is a unique identifier because I keep track of the last one that was used, and then I increase it every time. Then I take my database of articles, and I add it to it. I'll explain this in a few, but this is me adding that article now into the existing collection. We'll call it a collection of articles. And then what happens at the end here, once I've created that thing? Right? Yeah. That's exactly what we do, is we just say, redirect the user now.
Yeah. Oh, but is it showing up as a 302 because we just have dev tools from works and it's immediately receiving that? Like,
well, no, it's no problem. I could do this. I could do something like this.
but that should then give it 200.
Okay, hold on. No, redirect is more like this. So a redirect is shorthand for something more like this. I have my set headers, location, / I want to tell the client where to redirect the user to, right? And it's the / page. So then I also want to say response.status 302. Okay? And then I send nothing maybe in the body of the document. So if I do this, if I create a response on the server that adds a location to the header and sends a status code of 302, then what have I done? And sends a status code of 302. It's a redirect. Well, I don't know. The browser is what decides to try to do the redirect or not, right? So the server is asking the browser to do the redirect, and it's through a status code of 302 that it informs the browser that's what it needs.
Oh, okay. I just saw the message you were getting in Chrome DevTools was unsuccessful.
No, it's a good. That's a fine redirect. 302 is a fine redirect.
That's a response to the browser.
This is a response. Yeah, when the browser makes the post request, this is the response to the browser, and then it causes a redirect. Then it causes the browser to redirect back to the list of pages.
But the 200 wouldn't appear because it hasn't followed suit with the response yet. Like this is in between.
Well, 200 definitely appeared in the second response, right?
Yeah, in the second one, but before the second response happened, the 302 happened.
So yeah, so you only get one status code in a response. So yeah, you either get 200 or 302, and 302 is successful. It just means
200 would have been paired with the get.
Yeah. Normally you do 200 and get go together most of the time. Yes, for sure. Okay, let's take our break, and then we'll come back and we'll write the code for this. Okay. All right, well, let's get back to it. As I mentioned, we're kind of over time anyway, so maybe I've already kind of bought into that. All right. So as I promised, yeah, we'd go through this this project here. We'll build this project. I've got a few more concepts I need to really make sure we talk about. Those things are, I'll just go into the notes to make sure I don't forget any of them. So as I'm going through this, I want to make sure that I cover, oh, there's actually one more thing to show you. Good thing I looked at this. And we did that. So development tools I talked about. Testing with Cypress I'll bring up. So we want to make sure middleware, that I cover middleware. I'm going to talk to you about middleware and how to use middleware. It might not be fully understood by the end of this, but I'm just going to try and, my goal is to show you situations or practical examples of where middleware can be useful. I've got, I think, 3 situations here. And then also want to do forms. So I'm going to show you how to set up forms, how to set the method and the action on a form. In EJS, we'll do that. And then that's it. So the part that I forgot just before we left here is when I make this request, so I'm going to finish this off, new post request, new blog post. I go to my network tab. I hit submit here. When I look at this article, so I made the post on /articles, I'm adding a new article resource. I have properties I need to add to this, right? I have this data that goes with it. So the data, where does the data exist when I post a new, from a form? To the server, I'm making a request, a post request, and I'm including data in that request. Where do I include that data? Yeah. In the request body, exactly. So we're going to just quickly look at the request body down here. At the bottom, this is where it has the form body here. This is what it looks like. This is actually the data that's sent in plain text on the request, on that post request, in the body of that request. So here it says title equals new plus post plus request. So it looks like pluses are replacing spaces. And content equals new plus blog plus post. What this is called is a URL encoded string. And it is encoded to map key value pairs. My keys are title and content, right? And the values are new post request and new blog post. So title equals new blog post or new post request, and content equals new blog post. This is how I'm sending data on the body to the server. So the question is this the same all the time? Do we always do it this way? And the answer is we don't always do it this way. We don't always send key value pairs. We normally do send key value pairs, but we send strings. And those strings can be encoded in a certain format, right? We can say that the body is encoded in a certain format. And so we, in the response here, hold on, actually we can, here we go. The content type, we can see that the content type is application xwww form URL encoded. I didn't come up with that, that's why it's so bad. But it tells us at least what this is that when my server accepts that body data, it needs to know how to decode it, right? Yeah. So it looks at the content type and says, oh, you're a URL encoded form data. I know how to deal with that. That's happening on the server. With the request that's being sent to it. So JSON's another option. That's why I said it's not. So those are key value pairs as well. But if you wanted to send JSON, which we will do next week, then what you would do instead is your content type would be application JSON. So you tell the server, I'm sending you JSON instead. And then down here, this would be a raw JSON string that would be sent instead. It would be encoded as JSON. Well, if I want to view the parsed version, then Chrome tools.
Oh, you were looking at the source. Oh.
Yeah, I'm looking at the actual source here. Okay, so viewing source is giving me the actual string that goes on the body, because we can only send strings on the body. That's sending me the actual string. This is showing me the parse version because it's way nicer to read, right? And it's kind of like if I go to preview here. Oh, I guess not on this request, but sometimes if I get JSON and I want to see a list of that JSON, or I want to send JSON, you definitely like to look at it in a parsed view that the browser gives us.
Header, where would it say the JSON part? Like if you were passing in JSON?
So you have two things. One, the body will contain a JSON string, or just a JSON string. And two, the request. So this is request headers here.
Yeah.
The request headers includes a content type of application, and then in the case of JSON, you have to put JSON. But in this case, it's URL encoded, so the server has to be able to handle a URL encoded body. Okay. A few more quick things on this site. I can go to any blog post. When I go to the blog post, it shows me when it was created, the content, and the title. If I want to, I can edit this blog post. I don't know why there's that space there, testing. I update that. I've added now testing to the end of it. I can delete this blog post. I click delete here. When I click delete, it did something here. I didn't do a delete method. So I'm only going to use get and post, just like you're only going to use get and post for TinyApp. But if I was doing this with Ajax instead, if I was deleting something with Ajax, then you would see a request method of delete. But I used post because I'm using a form. This article here, when I go delete it, this button is in a form. Okay? Now that form has a structure to it. The form has a method, which is post. It's either get or post. And then it has an action, and the action is also known as the path in this case. /articles/3 and then /delete. That's going to be the route I'm going to use to delete things. And the reason why is because I also have an edit path. And if I go here and I look at this, this also uses a post. So the way that I can tell the server that it's an edit instead of a delete is that I actually include that in my URL, as a parameter on the URL here. But normally, if I use a put request instead, well, then I don't need to put /edit, because put tells the server that it's an edit instead. It could differentiate those things. So this is the model we're going to be using. I'm just putting the action that I want as well when the path is not, or is ambiguous. It's too ambiguous for the server. And then I think that's it. So I think that's all of the functionality. What I want to do is I'm going to rip a lot of this stuff out. So, but let me, yeah, one more thing. Remember when we looked at the body request? The body post request, it said title equals and content equals. When I do a post request on the articles form, then the title is equal to, well, whatever I put in the input field, because I gave it the name title. That's where that comes from. When I submit a form, it grabs all the fields in the form, it finds their names, and then it matches their names and their values together, and then it creates that URL encoded list for you. So because I called this input field title, that's what I expect the key to be when it's sent, that server sent to the that data is sent to the server. With the text area, I've named the text area content because that's the key for the content that I want on that thing. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you're talking about string JavaScript template literals. Not here. We're in. This would be HTML right now. Yeah. All right. So this app is running right now. I've got the server running, and I'm gonna set it up so that we can do all of our testing automatically. This is the first time I've done this before. We'll call it test-driven lecturing, because I've got automated tests set up that give me a list of all the features that I need to add to this application, and I can just keep running these things with my npm test command. And so it's going to open up my test tool. Give it a second here. So this test tool gives me a list of the different tests that I want to run. I've got 7 files here. The first one is just a bunch of tests that will confirm the navigation works in my site, that I can go from different pages to other pages. The second one will be all tests about the index page. Third is about the create behavior. Then I'm going to do about show, edit, delete, and then errors at the end. So if I run this here, now can you imagine if you had this for your application, right? Make life a little bit easier. Because right now, how do you do the same thing? I've got this list over here. So once all these things have check marks beside them, then I've completed the work today. You have something similar, right? I mean, similar to my list, not to the tool. Yeah, sorry about that. We're going to go to Web Compass, and we're going to head over to, I guess, if I choose your cohort, and I go to this Tiny App project here, and we look at this, right? Behavior requirements. This is what I'm talking about. You have these behavior requirements. You have this list of things that need to happen for this project to be complete. But the problem is, the only way we know that you know that these things have been done is if you manually go through and test every single one of them, right? So I don't have good news in the sense that we're not going to be doing automated testing immediately. We will do it in the future. We will do it in later weeks. But I thought this would be an interesting way to kind of get our get warmed up and actually get excited about this concept, because it's something that's actually, these tools are relatively, this tool specifically is relatively new, and it's getting very exciting because it's making testing a lot easier than it ever has been, which makes it a lot more likely people will do it. And the workflow, it really is, it's pretty great. So every time I make a change to my tests, it will rerun these things. And I don't really want to run every single section of tests for everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the navigation section, and I'm just going to run those tests only, and I'm going to try to get as many of those knocked out as I can first. So I can just click on navigation tests here. It'll reopen. And now it's just going to run the navigation tests over and over. And so that is, here, let's see. Navigates to the root page successfully. Navigates to the first article by clicking on the title. Navigates to the create article page. Navigates to the edit article page. There's a bunch of these things. I guess the first thing we should do is just set up our root page, right? Like there's not much else to do on a website than get that index going. All right, so I'm also going to git branch, or I guess git checkout -b, so make a branch and check it out, to a live version of this, because I'm going to be gutting it, so I don't really want to lose all that stuff that I did already. I'll just do it in a live branch instead. Okay. So let's see here. Let's go with, let's get rid of all that. Let's get rid of that. All of those as well. Sorry? I do, yeah. I do have a Vim plugin. All right, so now our server is pretty boring. It doesn't do anything. Actually, there's two things right now. I've got one. Actually, that should be I think a GET request. I mean, actually, this should be a POST request, but I don't. This is just helping me test. I'm going to leave it there because it's just helping me test. After every single test gets run, that's every single one of these things. Not one of these. These are test collections. After every single one of my tests get run, it resets the database because I want to make sure that every test is isolated, that every test doesn't have a dependency on anything else. So in order to do that, I'm running my real server. So I just have a little route here so that every single time a test is done, it calls this route, resets the server so the next test is fresh. That's all this is for. Don't worry too much about that. And then this is going to be an error handler. We'll put that back in, but I don't really want to write it from scratch. So let's start at the top. I've got imports, right? So the first thing I'm importing is the path library. This is a built-in node library. So I'm going to have to be doing some stuff with paths, and the easiest way to do that is by using this library, because things like Windows and Linux are different. Some have forward slashes, some have backslashes. By using this library, it will abstract that away. We don't have to worry about it too much. It'll join paths for us properly, right? So that, and I'm using that down here where I customize the location of my EJS views. So we've all installed and set up EJS, right? Yeah, okay. So I've got EJS here. Well, actually, I didn't talk about this. Here I'm setting up my port. I'm going to have a variable that holds the port that I want, and I'm going to grab that port from the environment, from an environment variable, so I can configure this every time I run it if I want. Or it's going to default to 3000. That's what this code is for. I create my new application using Express, and then I set the view engine to EJS. It makes that works. And then I set my views directory. So my views are actually inside the views directory here with a index, show, edit, delete, create, and then partials. So those are all my view files. I'm going to delete them. I'll delete the contents of them one at a time as we start to go through them. Because until I have the route that renders it, I don't need to clear that stuff out, right? Until I'm using it, it doesn't really matter. But this is kind of what they look like. Here's what those files look like. They're just pretty standard. And then in here, I set up my database. So this is very similar to what you've done in TinyApp because it's just an object that holds data in a nice organized way for me. That file is here. This file exports a function called create database. It's something I can call whenever I want. And what this does is it returns an object that has my next ID, for example. If I want to add a new ID and I want to increment every time, well, I need to keep track of what the last ID was, so I could do that on here. Articles is going to be an object full of articles with the key, or the key is going to be the ID of the article, and then the value is going to be the properties of that article, the ID and the title. I've got this little helper function that I put on here, and what it does is it takes those keys, because here's what articles looks like. It takes these keys. It's an object with other objects in it. It takes all these keys and it makes an array out of them, and then it converts them into an array of objects, and then it sorts it by date. So that's what this function is doing for me. Is I want to get all the articles. It's going to give me an array of sorted articles. That's what this function is for. And then this other function that I want to be able to call in the database is called reset. And what it's doing is it's taking me back to the initial data set, and that's just being used by that reset function so that every test gets run, it resets the database, it starts fresh again. So my tests can predict what the data will be when they start running. So this is what the database object is. And I just access it in a few different ways. I can say database reset, and then I can also say database.articles or database.getArticles, and that's going to give me an array of articles. I can modify the existing object. I can modify that stuff when I do edits and deletes and updates and that type of stuff. So let's get started with this test here. The first test says navigates to the route successfully. I need to be able to visit the /, and that test is failing right now. So what do I need to do to make that test pass? Yeah.
Go into your index and then create a route for that.
That's right. I'm going to create a route for that. Now I'm designing a route, which is it's a method and a path and a behavior. Yeah. Okay. So what is my app.get? So that's my method. And then the path would be the /. / is the path. So this is how I'm building my index. Yep. Request and response. I do request and response. Do you want to know why? Instead of res and rec. Yeah, like for me, res and rec are so close that when I'm looking at them, it's hard to pick it up as quickly. The other thing is that if I make response res is, to me, could mean so many different things that I've worked with. We talked about resources today. I could shorten resource down to res pretty easily. Is that a resource, or is it a response? Or a result, maybe. So this is why I'm doing the long form here. I would love to put application here. Maybe that's going a little too far. I see, I'm just trying to make it easy for you. So we're going to go with what I see in all the documentation, which is app. But I really want to type application there. I really like longer words for those types of things. Okay. So we've got the path, we've got the method. What is the behavior of this?
You're going to render the home page?
Yeah, I'm going to render the home page. It's going to be called the index page. We'll call it the index page. So this is going to be a view, right? And it's my EJS folder. And so I just identify it that when someone makes a request to /, I'm going to render the index view. Okay. So here's my index view. I'm going to get rid of all of the stuff that's important here. And now I have a pretty basic index page that has two partials that it loads. One partial here contains all of my head information, all the stuff that I want to be on every page in the head of my document. I've put it in this partial here so that I don't have to type the blah, 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 blog 3 times for each file. I can just include this in any file that I want this to have. And then also, I want these styles to be included in every single document that I render. So if I put that in here, I could have 1, 2, 3, 5 different CSS files all in here, and all of my pages will load them. This just makes my life quite a bit easier. So that's what's happening up here. The head, it's loading the head EJS into the head of this document. It has a body with a header. The header includes the header partial, which isn't super exciting. It just has one header here, the blah, 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 blog in an h1 tag. If I want to add more to the header, though, I can just put it into the partial, and every page will have it. If I want to put email address of who's logged in, for example, a partial makes that a little bit easier to deal with. All right, I think I can satisfy that test now, so we should check to see what happens when I run it. The first test passed, right? Look at this. Successful. It navigates to the root successfully. So I can go here and I can look at what happened. It visited the page, and it expected the path name to be /. Okay. Well, yeah, it handles the response, so that's an okay test, right? I can now keep going and look and seeing what's the next test that I could make pass easily. Navigates to the first article by clicking on a link. What's my dependencies there? What do I actually have to build to make this work? I have to have data. That has to get sent in this render. It has to be listed out as articles. I then have to be able to click on one of those articles, so it has to be a link. When I click on that article link, it needs to have a route that handles that request. And that route needs to send back a rendered show page for me. That's a lot of stuff, right? So maybe what I'll do is I'll switch over. Now that the navigation's working for this page, I'll switch over to the index tests, and I'll focus on writing these index tests now, and then I can go back and do navigation ones after I've got these features in here. So the first one has the title Bob blah, the Bob blah 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 blog. That's just confirming that the page, not only that I navigated to it, but it has what I expect on it, which is that title is there. So this test is passing because of that. And if I went in here and I changed this in any way and I refreshed it, then that test fails because it no longer has that term in it. It's missing a character for anyone who can't see this, right? But that is not, and it cannot find that. So that's why that's failing. I'm not going to keep doing that for everyone. I'm just kind of showing you how this tool works. Put it back. Okay, test passes. My requirement is met. I don't even have to think twice about it, right? Okay. Who's going to get Tiny App done quickest and then build this for the rest of, build the testing for everyone to use? Right, because it would be transferable. One person builds it. It's the same requirements for everyone. Yeah, who from the who's gonna you're all gonna nominate someone. I know who you're thinking of. Actually, I don't know who it is, but you are thinking of someone. Don't worry about it. That's not important. That's not important. I'd help you. Okay. Okay. So we've satisfied that first requirement, which is that it shows the title. The second requirement is that it has a create page link. So let's add that create page link. I'm just going to put that in here into this header section. I don't want it on every page, so I'm going to put it just in this one. It's going to be a articles new page. Okay, as soon as I do that, I need to think I also need to make this route. So let me, okay, don't let me stop, like don't let me forget that. I've just written this code which says I'm going to make a request, so articles new. I should immediately go into my server file and add the route for this. But I probably should just finish that first and then now I can go and do it, right? So what is the, it's a link, so it's a GET request. And what is the path? I'm creating a new article. Yeah. Yeah, articles and then /new. We're going to do a GET request on articles new. Because if I was doing a GET request on just articles, I expect to get a list of articles back. That would make more sense to me if I do a GET request on articles. But if we're going to create an article, but we need two requests. So this request is only going to give us the form. And then when we click the form, we do another request, not this one. Cool? Yeah, so this is the first request just to get the form. So here we go. Articles new, request, response. And this thing is going to response.render. I have a view for this already. We'll call this the create EJS file. Okay, because we'd actually there's no EJS file for actually creating the resource. That's a JavaScript behavior that's going to be in the route. But there is a create EJS file that renders a form that lets us click the button. That's right here. I'm going to get rid of this. And now when I run my test, second test passes. I now have a create article link there. And the test confirms that there's a create, I should probably fix that. It says create page link. That's a create article link, but that's what I meant. So it confirms that it says create article. The next thing that's supposed to happen is that it's supposed to list the blog articles, right? So we're going to list the blog articles out. Is anyone getting sick of, let me know when you get sick of these default styles, and then we can apply this CSS that I made. All right? You let me know. We'll keep building until you tell. Change it now. Okay, great. So we're going to have to take a quick break. We've made. Okay, actually, let's check one more thing, and then we'll do this. I'm going to switch back over to the navigation spec. Hold on, it's going to fail that one. Oh, but I did get a new pass here. It can navigate to the create article page because I've now created the link and the route that handles it. This test in the navigation test has now passed as a result of that. Yes.
So the test is passing because it has code that is accessing, like let's say the create article, but we haven't created anything to access the create article.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked. It's a great opportunity to talk about it. I'm going to quickly show you what a test looks like. Is that cool? Maybe that answers the question.
Well, I'm just double checking. Like I understand what the test is doing. I'm just making sure that that's actually what's happening. Like we're passing the test, even though the thing hasn't been created because it's accessing it using its own code.
Well, yeah. So the test is running its own code, and what that code does, it looks like this, right? It says here, this page has the title blah 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 blog. That's the name of the test. And then I'm using this tool to check to see what the title is, and I'm comparing it to say, does the title equal the blah, 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 blah blog? So this is my test running. The server is running. So it starts off by making a request to /. It visits that page. So I'm trying to simulate the user's behavior as much as possible. So what the tests are doing are things like find the element on the page and then confirm that it exists or not. Or maybe here, find an element on the page, the first of that element, and then check to see if it has a certain text associated with it. So my tests are running, and they're looking at the DOM, and they're verifying that certain elements are there, that certain text is there, and then if it's not there, that's when it fails. that make sense? I can also check the location bar to see if I made if when I click a link, it goes to the right place or not. Yeah, so these tests, I'm not going to go into the details of any of these because this is definitely not about testing, but but those are there for people to look at as well if they're interested. Okay. So this response render should be the create EJS page. So, I mean, I can always just go take a look at the page and see what's going on. And I can click on the create article, and it takes me here. I'm now in the articles new. So it's just doing this for me. I don't have to manually test. Make sense? OK. Now let's fix the styles quickly. It means we're going to have to take a small detour and talk about middleware. Right now, when I load this file, when I load bob-blah-blah-blah-blog, it loads localhost. I get back a response here, and in the response, the head has a link to the style.css, right? So my file has a link to CSS, but we're not seeing it render. Well, we can see that when the request is made for the CSS, it actually never downloads that. The CSS is not served by our web server. We have to enable the web server to serve our static assets, including CSS and images. I've put all of those files that I want to be able to serve like that inside the public directory here. So the public directory holds files that I want the web server to be able to serve, other than HTML, let's say, in this case. I mean, you can put HTML in here, but we're doing HTML through EJS. So these happen to just be our styles that we want to be able to serve. app.get/css/styles.css. That could handle a request, right? If I create a route for app for CSS styles.css, and I can handle a GET request, as long as I can load up the contents of that file. Actually, wait, why don't I just do it this way? Why am I not putting the styles in the EJS file?
Yeah, like I thought that's what we've been doing.
Well, so the styles. So when you say am I putting the styles in the EJS file? Do you mean like this? Embedded here?
No, not embedded.
Okay.
Like I just thought in our code, when we've been doing EJS files, we've been requiring maybe not. Oh yeah, we are. We have like we're bootstrapping the CSS, which is like making a reference to style sheet.
So we're still doing that. I mean, I have that right here. I'm doing the same thing, I think, as you are, where I have a link tag here that links to style CSS. So all of my templates are including a link tag, and that link tag is causing the browser to make a request for that style sheet when I load the page. But the problem is my server doesn't know how to handle that request, whereas your server probably does. If you're making requests from that. And the other thing is you can make requests to other servers for styles and not even have to worry about serving them from your own site if you use like a content distribution network or something like that. But what we're dealing with right now is the fact that my server is being asked for here. The server, we're making a request to my server that says, give me the contents of /css/styles.css. And the server is, well, not able to handle it. It doesn't know how to handle that. So what we need to do is make sure we handle that route. Okay? Does this make sense so far? And I could say response.send, and then I could just go maybe in, well, if you want styles.css, then I'll just make it really easy and paste it right here. So now my, well, I don't even know if that'll work. Probably not. No, because it's got double quotes here. But the idea is that we can send whatever we want. What we need to do is load the file, take the contents of the file, and send that to whoever requested it, right? So what we want to do here, we could use the send file command. This would be fs or send file, and then we do path.resolve dir name, and then we find our public path, which is up a level, and then in the public directory, and then based on the request.url. So this is how I could start to handle these types of requests. But I don't want to write a route for every single image, CSS, or JavaScript file that I want to serve, right? That sounds stupid. So instead what we would do is use middleware for this to solve that problem, where I'm not going to write a handler for public static files. What I'll do instead is I'll use the middleware built into Express, which is Express static. And when I go here, we can see that this is what solves my problem. My CSS will be served if I call express.static with the location, my public directory, and I use that as middleware. So here, what Express expects is for me to app.use. App.use means get, post, put, delete. Any method is handled by this. Right? We're going to say not specifically one type of method, but any method. So we'll app.use. And we always pass request response, or we get past request and response, and this function called next. So what's happening here now is it's saying if the file exists in the public directory, then what do we want to do if the file exists in the public directory? Sorry? Serve it, yeah. Load the file and send it in the response. And then here, return. No more. This function doesn't get called anymore after that because we've just handled the response. But if we do not find that file in the public directory, which means it's a request that is not for a file in our public directory, then we don't hit that condition. And what we want to do is call next. And if we call next, it tells Express that we did not finish the response, that we need something else to take a look. And so what will happen is it'll go to the next handler and see, are you my handler? And then it'll say, are you my handler? And then, are you my handler? And eventually get to the end and 404 not found, maybe, right? So that's what next is for. It's for us to be able to have any of our handlers not finish the request or not finish the response, but can tell Express to continue looking for something that can. And I can actually take any of these other requests, add next to them, and if I do not finish the response, then I can call next, and it'll keep looking for me. Yeah.
Do you have to throw in like an app.get and then like quotation with stars, what that one's called, to catch all other options other than what you have listed for a 404?
Yeah.
Does it automatically apply if there's no app.get for it, then it automatically goes to 404?
Yeah. Question is, do we have to have a catch-all with star? We do if we want to customize that behavior. The default behavior is that it does a 404 not found. Yeah. But I'm going to hopefully, we're getting close to the end of time, and I've definitely got a lot of material to cover, but I do have error handling in here and custom error handling, so how we do our own 404 error handling and how we can throw an error from a route. So hopefully I can get to that. If not, it is in the example. It's in the notes, so you could definitely take a look at that. But yeah, you don't have to do a star catch-all if you're OK with the default behavior. And I would actually recommend handling errors using the Express handling rather than that's just a 404 error, but you could handle any type of error yourself, like 403s and 401s, with the technique that I have in the file that's committed to GitHub. OK. So this is our middleware. This is now a middleware function because it can be used with all of our requests. Anytime a request is made, it'll go through this middleware. Maybe the middleware handle it, maybe it won't. If I call express.static and I pass it the public value, then it's going to create this function for me. This is what it creates. And it returns that function, and I pass that function to the app.use. So here, this returns that function for me, and I didn't have to implement it. So now I'm using middleware to serve all of the requests that match files in my public directory. So the public directory is a directory that I've defined here. No problem. It's a directory I've defined here. I've called it public, but the intention is that these files are publicly accessible. Whereas someone cannot make a request for errors.js. They just cannot access that file. My web server will not send it back to them. But anything in the public directory will now be served by my middleware because I've configured it that way. So now my server has restarted. And when I go here, now it renders the styles because we no longer, now my server, through that middleware, serves this file when the request is made by the browser. Yes?
So about middleware, so it's pretty much what's gonna like handle if you don't want to do something manually, you just use middleware to like do something for you. I don't know.
That's right. Well, to commonize or generalize behavior, exactly. And I would like to show you some more practical examples. So we'll build up on that. This was the first one. I've got 2 more middleware examples that I'd love to get to. But I mean, the way it's going now, are we okay with doing another 20 minutes, probably 20 to 30 minutes? Yeah. All right. Well, if we're okay with that, then I am. Yeah, it's worth it. Okay. Yeah. And hopefully the notes fill in any gaps if we have to rush through anything, because that's another consideration, right? So when I run my tests now, it should now it's pretty. It has the styles. None of the tests passed. There were no tests that confirm styles are applied. I'm not writing any tests for that at this point. But for TinyApp, that doesn't really matter, right? So I didn't make it matter for this app. Okay. So here's what we want to do. We want to list the blog articles. That's all going to come down here. We're going to have a list of all the blog articles. And it's going to list the articles, and then it's also going to confirm that the articles are that they're ordered from newest to oldest, because that's also an important requirement for me. So I need to, this is behavior that exists on the route that I have already. It's the / route. So what I want to do is make a request to my database here. We'll get the articles from the database through get articles. Okay. Does anyone not know how I'm able to call database.getArticles? We're okay with this? That's just that function I created right here called getArticles that just does the conversion sorting for me. Okay. So I got articles here. Let's actually take a little peek into this and see what that value is. Oh, I just have to fix this one moment. Oh, wait a second. Whoa, I built this on Windows. All right. There we go. So we're now listening on port 3000. I've got the debugger attached. Has anyone not seen the debugger yet? We've all seen it. Okay, cool. So the way that this code is going to get executed, how does this code get What do I have to do to make this code be executed? The server is running right now. Yeah, I need to go to the home page. I need to make the request to this web server so that this route handles it. There we go. I've made the request, and my debugger has stopped on the line that I told it to, which is line 23. And so now I get to take a look at what articles is. Is anyone as excited as I am? That's articles right here. It's an array with a length of 3. Let me zoom in a little bit for you. It's an array with a length of 3. It's got 3 objects. Object 1 has an ID of 3. Object 2 has an ID of 1, and ID or object whatever 2. Yeah, it's in a different order. 3, 1, then 2. Each object has content. It has a date. It has an ID and a title. So that matches those properties. These are our resources. This is our collection of resources now available to us in the route. So we can do this read operation, which is get all of the articles, and we can convert this into HTML, and we can send that back to the user. So articles is something I can pass into as a template bar to my index file, right? Okay. I'm now passing an articles key with the value that is an array of 3 items to my index template. So in here, I should be able to use it. Articles. And when I do that, oops, of course I have to. I'm going to kill this, I get rid of the debugger, don't need it right now, and I'm going to run this here, and that's what we have. So this is what gets printed out now when I just take articles, which is an array of articles, and put it into my EJS file. So what I want to do is loop over my articles. It's an iterable object, right? So I'll do my opening and closing for the for loop. So what's this code going to, what would this produce now if I were to run this and check it out? What does it produce? Yes?
Does each line of articles array, so it'll do like the first index, second index, third index.
But it's still going to do the same thing because you're calling the object. You need to call the key.
That's right, yeah.
Value.
Yeah, it's going to print object, object, object 3 times. So we're not there yet where we're actually, oops. See, it prints as object 9 times now. Because it's, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I get it.
Okay, it's no problem. It's kind of a trick question. But basically, the article, it's going to loop through each array. And then for each array, it's going to print out the whole thing. So that's not what we want, though. We want the article. So this is what we get instead. Oops. Article dot ID, for example. Or let's say title, for example. Here are my 3 titles. Lobbing law bombs, bank fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and why should you go to jail for a crime someone else noticed? I didn't have much to work with. I think he's an underused character, but so it's not just that I want to print out the article title 3 times. I want to actually create an article element, and in that article element, I want to print that stuff out. So it kind of gets nicer if I start to break that up in my EJS. This happens to be an like a semantic HTML tag that kind of means like an article on a page like that, like an article of a page, yeah. Yeah, it just so happens those things match. I got away from posting posts, but I didn't get away from putting articles in articles. Yeah. Yeah. You can use a div if you want. I kind of like to use section and main and article and just try and make my HTML a bit more semantic. Right? But a div would work here just as well. Okay. So my article header is going to be, I believe, in H2. And the article body is just going to be in the or actually I'll do an H3 for the article dot date. And then I'll do a paragraph tag for article.content. Oops. Matching closing tag for these guys, or these ones over here. All right. So now I've got three blog posts over here, 3 articles. Right. Each article lists its title. It's not a link yet. Its date. It looks like it's actually just a date object to string. And then the actual content of the blog. So we're making some progress here. Let's see which tests we pass now. So list the blog articles. Is that a test that we pass now? Yes. Oh wow, and they all get listed newest to oldest. So that's great. We passed all of the requirements for this. The page is not done yet, though, right? Because, for example, I can't click on this. Okay. What about the navigation? Have we improved that at all? Okay, it's still this one here. Navigates to the first article. Oops. Navigates to the first article by clicking on the title. So that's what I want to do now, is I just need to add here ahref, right? So now I have, ooh, it's getting kind of ugly. Okay. I've now given this thing a link, but I need to make sure it goes to the right place, because my test is not going to pass until it navigates to the right location. Even though these things are links that are clickable right now, the test is telling me that it expected to find articles 3, because that's what the link would take us. But what it got instead was /. So it never actually made the transition to that page. So we need to set this up. And if I put articles 3, articles, my test will pass, right? The test will pass. It passes now. But it's not good, because it will only go to that page, right? If I go back here and I go there, I'm going to get, oh, actually I don't have the page for it, but you know what I mean. Like it takes it goes to that URL no matter which one of these I click on. So I need to definitely use another variable, which is our article.id, to represent this value up here instead, right? That's much better now, because that's going to actually make it, when I click that link, it'll go to 3, 2, or 1, depending on which one it is. When I run this now, it actually successfully navigates to the create article page. So not the create article page. It creates to the... navigates to the first article by clicking the link. We're now seeing that the expectation is matched. When I clicked on the third link, the top one, that it actually went to that page for me. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with those index tests that are all passing. I'm going to go now and start working on my. Let's do the show one. Let's set it up so that the requirements here are that it has an edit article link, has a delete article link, that it shows the title, the content, and the date. Those are all the requirements for this page. So in index.js, I need to handle this, right? App dot right now, when I click on this, what type of request does it do? That's right. It's a GET request to /articles3. So it's a GET request to /articles. And then if I put 3 here, it only handles that specific request, right? So here's where I need to specify that I can take any ID, and it should still match this path. That's what a path matcher is. Path matcher can have variables like this available to, yes? So we're not, this has nothing to do with the HTML ID tags. We're not worried about that in this case. And this actually has nothing, there's no real official thing for this. This is actually a convention that we can use for the web server to look at this path and say, oh, you mean variable there, because it's :ID. So Express says, oh, you could have any value there, so we'll match on any number or any value that goes in there and catch, that could be caught by this path, this request. So what I need to do is response.render the show page, and I'll rerun my tests. Okay, so it doesn't work yet. Has an edit article link. Actually, well, that's the edit page. My bad. Show. Okay, so why is that not passing? Oh, my server's not running, I think. Yeah. Okay. Oh, my server's crashing. This is exciting. Okay, it's giving me an error. Article is not defined. Yeah, that makes sense. This EJS file, I didn't rip the stuff out of it yet, which I kind of forgot to do. So I'm going to my show.ejs, and I'm deleting the contents of this. There we go. So now, hopefully, my server doesn't crash when I run these tests. Let's take a look. Okay, good. Server is staying resilient to that. The tests are not passing, but at least it's not saying that it couldn't find the server. What it's saying instead is looking for a link tag. And it's because it can't find my edit or delete tag here. So we'll start by adding that. In the header here, ahref equals articles. Now here, I have to use the ID, right? If I'm going to edit this article, then I need to use % equals article.id and then / edit. And then that's going to give me my edit article button. So this here is where I'm going to use that article value first. Make sense? So now when I run this test, of course, what happened there? Oh, I didn't pass article again. Yeah, so I got to make sure I do that. Here I'm just going to I'm going to grab the article. Const article is equal to database.articles. And I could actually create a function called getArticles or getArticle that I pass the ID of the article and it gives me back just that thing. But there's a lot less work for this one, so I'm just going to say, so go to the database, grab the articles object, and find the object that has the key of whatever the ID is, so 1, 2, or 3. That's your article object. And then take that and pass it here in the render method. Now, okay, so that one's still taking some time. It might be because it can't go find the page. So when it clicks on it, might be failing that. But it's kind of interesting. Yeah, it's trying. Oh, I think the server was still crashed. Okay, there we go. There. So now my test is passing. It has the edit article link. We can confirm that over here. So I just need to do the same thing for the delete as well. So on here, I'll just take this, change my edits to delete. Run the test again. Those two tests pass. Now the thing is I need to show the title, the content, and the date. So I'll do that down here in the article. I'll show the title. That's going to be an H3. That's going to be a P tag. H3 and a P. And then this will be the title, the date, and the content. Oh, so this is saying that the date test is failing, but it is showing the date, right? So let's look at what the failure is actually telling us. It's looking for something that says less than a minute ago. So it's actually not looking for the date. It's looking to see if it actually has the sort of the time relative date that it's showing, and it doesn't have that. So I'm going to show you my second use for middleware. All right, and that is I want to pass maybe even a helper function to my templates. Because the way I could do this without middleware is I could say in the show template here, I want to pass this function called format distance to now. So format distance to now is a function it comes from this date functions library, and it allows me to give it a date, and it gives me back a string that says a week ago, 3 months ago, last year, something like that, right? This is kind of nice. I don't have to think about that. So I'm going to use this function here, and I could iterate through every single article, and then for every date, change the date, and then pass that article's object or already changed. Or I can do the formatting in the view itself, and I can do that by just passing my format distance to now function into the template. Yes?
So is that like through the DOM? Like, are you saying like you're changing it on the fly?
Okay, so this is not on the DOM. This doesn't happen on the client. This happens fully on the server. It just happens when the EJS file is being generated.
Okay, but so it is on the fly. Like You're not changing.
But it's happening before the response gets sent. So you could do this on the client as well, where we send a data object from the server, and then the client uses JavaScript to render the right formatted date. We're not doing that. We're using JavaScript on the server to do that. So here, format distance to now, I'm going to go down to my show call here, and I'm going to say format distance to now. I passed this function in as a template variable, right? Oh, what's going on now? What did I do wrong here? Oh, OK. So it's saying format distance to now is not defined. What? Oh, right, of course. I tried to get tricky. No, wait, that's... Oh, index, that's why. I need it on the show, right? So this is index. I passed the function to my index template, but not to my show template. So I need to make sure that I pass that on my show template. Let's do that here instead. OK. I run my tests. And it still says... Let's try one more time. That's a... Huh. Oh, that's weird. Oh, right. It says less than a minute, but it's supposed to say less than a minute ago. And if we look at date functions, format distance to now, we can take a look at the documentation. Come on, where are you? Oh, and relatively new. So format distance to now. Oh, OK. I don't know why it's not finding it there. I will look in these docs because there's like a suffix we want to put on this. We want to put the go suffix on it. And this wasn't important. I didn't want it to get in the way. But here, I'm taking, when I call format distance to now, I'm passing the date and then a property called add suffix so that it says a go at the end of it. OK, so now I've done that. I run my tests. Oops. Make sure the server isn't crashed. And I run the... What now? Did I? OK. Thank you. Ah, yes, thank you. That token. Unexpected token. All right, there we go. So now it's showing the date in the way that the test tells me to. So that fulfills that requirement now. It says less than a minute ago. So I can just run that. And now all of the show page tests have passed. So let's go. What else do I need to show you? Because maybe we don't get through all of those requirements. OK, so let's handle the creation. Let's handle the creation of this blog post. So we have the route that handles the form, but when we click that post button, we need to have a route that handles that action. App.post is what we're going to use for that. And it's going to be a post request on /articles. Okay. So post on /articles is going to be to create a new article, request, response. And so now what we want to do is, what are the steps to create a new resource? What are the important pieces for a resource? Oh, there's yeah, good. So I need to get the data that I have already, and I want to add to that. And I'm going to get the information about the new resource on the request body. By the end of the post, I'll send a response. It'll be a redirect. So the first thing I want to do is actually create my new resource. So this will be const article. Sorry, not articles, article. This is one single article. And if I didn't have an in-memory database, I would do maybe a database SQL query that says insert into. Maybe that's what I do here instead. But we're working with JavaScript here, so we'll just create a new object. The article has to have an ID. The ID is going to come from the database. I'm going to say database.next ID. It's going to give me the next ID available. In this case, it's number 4, and then I'll increase it to 5. So that's how that will work.
So this is the server assigning the unique identifier to the resource. Title, that's going to come from request.body.title. 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 This is the body data. Remember that URL encoded data we looked at a long, long time ago? Sorry? Yeah, from the form, exactly. The URL encoded data from the form. That's going to be sent to Express. Express is going to take that data, and we need to convert that into key value pairs. So we would have an object called body on the request that contains the keys for the data in that request, title and content. We will grab content as well, request.body.content, and we will also do a date here, and this is going to be a new date. So we're just going to create a new date on the server when that resource gets created. Okay. Console, or let's say response.redirect to / right? We want to go back to the root page after this resource is created. Does that make sense? So we have our redirect now. And the last thing we need to do is take the database articles, and articles is an object. What's the ID of the article? We know it now. We just didn't know it before.
I've never like seen the unique literally just do like plus and operand on top of the
Okay. Yeah, it would be, if I did it the other way, I'd probably say database.next ID plus equals 1.
But how can you call it when, like, without going into the database? We don't know what the exact ID is. We just know that it's one more than previous.
Yeah, so my database has this value right on it, next ID, and I keep track of that in this object. And in your database, the database will keep track of what the next value would be, so it'll figure that out. So the way that this is working is I'm grabbing this value from the database, and every time, actually it'd be nicer if I had a get unique ID function, right? If I have a get unique ID function, then what I'll do is I'll pass this.next ID, and then I'll say this.next ID plus equals 1. So actually I've moved that behavior now into my database library. So my index should only have to call get unique ID here instead. Yeah.
So when you call that, it grabs the new ID and it changes the value of the ID through that function.
That's right. And the reason I do that is because with the other way that I had it, me as the user of the database has to remember to increment it, whereas now I don't have to think about incrementing it at all. The database takes care of that concern. I just know that I get a unique ID every time I call this function. So this is actually an improvement. So database.articles is an object. Yeah, question? Where, here? Yeah, you're right. Yeah, thank you. Great. Good call. Yeah. So here, we want to actually, this is kind of, the reason I like to do, I did it the other way is because I can say this.return next ID plus plus all in one line. Here what I have to kind of do is say const old equals this.next ID, and then this.next ID plus 1 return old, so that I don't, yeah, that's kind of ugly, right? But this is more explicit for sure. Okay. So now I make my request, I make my article, and what I want to do now is I need to know the ID of the article so I can insert it into my object now. But because I created the article here, I can say article.id, right? That's just going to use the ID that was just created. And it'll use it to now insert that article with that ID into my object database.
Oh, yeah, it's within the post request, which is why you're able to call the article ID like that. Because it knows that you're referring to that article.
The one that I just created right here, exactly. So I create the article, I get the unique ID, I also add the title, the content, and the date to it, and then I add that into my database object here. Oops. And then I redirect the user, because that is now when I redirect the user, I'm telling the browser we've successfully created this object, so we'll redirect you, and then hopefully it's in your list after, right? So if I run this now, oops. Make sure that's working. Okay, interesting. So here, I know what it is. In my create, I gutted my create, right? No, sorry. Yeah, so it can't create an article yet. So this says, creates a new blog article with title and content. Well, I gutted this file. There's no forms here. So what I want to do is add in my form. And the form is where we get to decide what the action is going to mean path in this case. It's the action on the articles. And the method that we're going to use is the post type method, because we're changing the state of the server. And so here what we want to do is have an input field with a name equal to title, right? This is how we know we're going to have data URL encoded on that post request if we add fields with names that match what we want. We're going to say that this is I think that's okay. Type is equal to text. We'll do that as well. And then I'm going to do a text area. And that's going to have a name equal to content. And we put the placeholder here as well. Or maybe we don't need one. Yeah. Placeholder equals name. And placeholder equals content here. And then title one place. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you so much for calling that out. So I just I kind of went with it. This should actually be title. You're right, not name. So it's entering the data into these forms. It can find them now, but the last thing it needs to do is press the button. So that's what we'll add here at the end of this form. And I think the button has to say something specific. Submit. I don't remember exactly what it is, so I'll just use my test to figure it out. Maybe it won't tell. Yeah, it's looking for something called submit law blog article. So I can take that submit law blog article here, and I can paste that right in. My business requirements or my requirements determine what that should say, so it's nice to have that right there in that test. Oh, okay. So now we're getting an error here. Creates a new blog article with title and content. And it's saying, cannot read property, title of undefined when we post. So this is going to happen because right here, it's saying it's trying to call title on undefined. We've not set up the body parsing at this point. Our web server doesn't handle body parsing, so that's where I need to use this body parser that I've already imported. The body parser is what's going to convert URL encoded or JSON data into an object that will be added to our request called body. Make sense? So here, I'm going to set up some middleware. This is actually other middleware, body parser's middleware. Body parser, and it's a function. This function takes, it has multiple functions on it. I think what we use is URL encoded. See if that works. That passes the test. So that data is successfully making it to the server now. The server's parsing the body. The only problem is we have this deprecation warning here for body parser. So here it says provide the extended option. I'm going to go and do that. Now server resets, no more warning. The extended option is really just us telling it that there's URL encoded data that everyone agrees on, and then there's a little bit more that people have added on to support certain features. That's the extended part that is, I guess, not opt-in anymore. I guess Express just wants us to use that all the time. So this is body parser. I could also handle JSON body data. That's how I would handle JSON data as well, as by adding a body parser for JSON data. You don't need to do that this week, but just keep that in mind, that the body parser needs to know which kind of data we expect to get from the client. All right. So it says, shows a validation error when title or content are empty. My app right now will allow me to go and create an article that has no content, no title. So I want to have these fields be required, and in order to do that, the easiest way I know of is to actually make these fields required just right here. And then when I try and submit this form, if these fields are empty, it'll give me a little warning that looks like this. Please fill out this field. Does not advance in this case. So now my test can run, and it confirms there is a validation there now. Right, so I've satisfied that requirement. And I move on. Okay. So here, those are all passing. Great, we've done that. Let's do edit quickly here. I don't think we'll do edit and delete because they're so similar. But let's at least get this one going. This one's failing because we do not have an edit route. It's going to try and edit article 3 right now, because that my tests actually load that same data. You know that that database that I showed you that loads the object. My tests end up loading the same file, and you could actually, I can even look at that. So I know that there's going to be a resource with the value 3 because those are loaded into my test database. When I go to the, I think it's edit, yeah, edit. Well, let's rush through this one. So we'll just explain this one because it's already here. I have a form. My action describes the path /articles /3 /edit, maybe. It's a post request when I edit something. I'm not using put because we can't with a form. And what happens is all of my input data starts off with the existing article title. The value of input for my edit form starts as the value that currently exists for the title. And my value for the content, for the text area, starts as article.content. And this is what allows us to go to a post here and edit it. Oh, well, eventually. Let's see. We'll add that route. And then we have the button that does update. So this updates law blog article instead. And so here we need to write the route for this. app.get articles ID edit. Right. Does this make sense? I'm handling the edit. This is going to be the edit page for an article, and that article does need an ID because we're going to be editing something specific here, and that's how we're going to grab the article data that we can pass to the Express or the EJS template. Request, response. Well, we'll make another one right now. That's right. Yeah. It's just like with new, we have 2 requests: one for get to get the page, and one for post for the actual form action.
Does it need to be inside the get?
Does this post need to be?
Or no, because once it goes, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll get edit. We'll click the form. It'll post, and then it'll redirect back to the. Actually, I think we need the show page, or we did the show page already. Never mind. Yeah, we got that one here. So. The reason why I am putting edit here is because otherwise we can't disambiguate between these 2 routes. One route shows us an article. One route allows us to edit that article. So I have to put this here to make sure that it does not conflict with this first route that I created, because they both use the same method. So here, I'm going to grab the article, and I'm going to render the edit page, and I don't think I need that function. And so now, saying cannot post articles 3 edit, so that's the next step. But it got that far. It actually added data. We can step through and see it visited this page. It found this form. It cleared it. It added a new title to it. And then it found the content and it added not a real school to it. We can see it's the let Bob blah blah show you how you can lob law bombs, the blah blah law bomb lobbying school of law. Not a real school. It updates it. See, not a real school. And then clicks the submit button, which takes us to the next page. But the problem is we haven't handled that route. So let's do that. Our post articles request response. And what this will do is response post is be on ID edit as well. We want to redirect. And we're going to redirect to /articles. And then what? Should we go back to the list? I think we should go back to the one we changed, not the list. Go back to the one we changed, right? So in that case, we want to redirect to articles / well, here I could use a template literal and use request.params.id exactly, yeah. Okay, so this won't actually perform the edit, right? So I need to have that behavior. I need to grab that existing article. Right here. So I'm doing a modification to the existing object. That's going to grab that article, and then article.title is equal to request.body.title, and article.content is equal to request.body.content. There's no title. I mean, there's no ID. We're using the same ID. The article has the ID on it already. We're just changing these two values. It already has a date. We'll keep that date, and then we'll redirect back to that article. So now the edit page is working for us. When we get to the end here, we have the edited post showing, and it's the articles 3 page that's been redirected to. Okay. So I think I covered, I just want to make sure I covered all the form stuff that I wanted to, I think. Important parts of the form. A form has an action and a method. We have name attributes. We put the required attribute, and clicking on a button in a form causes it to be submitted. So those are the important parts. I've got one more thing I want to show you with middleware, but then the notes will have to kind of guide you for the last bit. Okay. I'm going to do it with this get articles middleware that I created. What this middleware is responsible for, I have a number of different routes where I need to get an article, and if that article doesn't exist, I need to handle the error, right? I need to send a 404, or maybe a 401 if you're not authorized, or 403 forbidden. But I might need to handle this error. I'm going to create this middleware here that's actually going to be responsible for finding the article and checking to see if it exists or not. And if it exists, I will make it available to my templates. And if it doesn't exist, then I will send a 404 error back. So the first line here, I'm doing object destructuring. Have we done object destructuring yet?
Loosely, yes.
Okay, so this would be the same as me doing it this way. I'm grabbing an ID property from the params, and then I'm creating a local variable called ID. It just makes it easier on me to do it that way. Although I can inline this directly here. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm going into my database of articles. Oops, that should be at the top here. Yep. So I'm going through my database of articles, and I'm grabbing a specific article, and I'm assigning that to this local variable article. And if that article doesn't exist, then my value would be undefined, correct? Right? If I don't find something in an object, it's undefined. So if the article is undefined, then what I do is I return from this function, which means don't execute it any further, and call next. Remember, next tells express to keep going, past this error object that I created. And I actually have that here. It's a very simple error 404, messages law bomb not found, status code 404. So this is just defining the information about the error that I need. And that error is going to be passed into this event handler. Down here, I have my error handling middleware, which the difference is it takes the error first as a parameter. And it checks to see if there is an error. And if there is an error and it's a truthy value, then I check to see if it's a status code error. And if it's a status code error, then I set my status code to that status code, and I include the error message in the render call. So I actually have this this error EJS file somewhere here. Oh, error EJS file, down here. And what it does is it takes that error and it just renders the message out for me. Okay. If everything, otherwise, if it's not an error that I recognize, I'm just going to say it's a status 500 error. So now I don't have, this is my error catching. It's not going to handle 404s for me. I'm handling them myself. And if I go to, well, articles 15, then I have this problem, right? I get this issue where property ID of undefined. So it's not going through that check yet, right? So what I need to do is I want to make sure that actually I should send request.params. Oh, right here. It's not calling this middleware. When would this function be called? It doesn't yet, right? I've just declared it. So what I could do is I could say, well, before every request that I make, let's check to see if there's a request params ID and grab that article. Well, this is a bit of a problem because now I have to check to see if we even have a request.params ID. Because if this is getting called on every single request, then some requests don't have IDs, so this won't really work for me. I don't even want to call this on every route. I only want to call it for every route that has an ID, an article, that needs an article. So I don't know if people have seen this yet, but down here, I can pass more than one function to handle this route. My behavior can be composed from a number of different functions run in sequence. So when I handle a GET request on /articles, the first thing that happens is GET article handles it. Comes up here. It checks to see if that article exists or not. And if it doesn't exist, then it sends 404 not found. And if it does exist, then it attaches it to something called response locals. Okay? So let's keep going. If it is found, then it attaches it to response locals and it calls next. When next gets called, get article is done, and the next thing that happens is it handles the response with this next function. Now we get the article again and we pass the article down to the render call. The reason why I do this here, response.locals, anything that I add to the locals object in an early request or an early handler will be available in my templates. I don't need to add that to my template variables. So here, because I've added locals.article, I can get rid of this here, and I can get rid of this part. I don't need to pass the article because it's on the locals object. And anything on the locals object can be rendered by the template file. Make sense? I know this is a little bit past where we need to be, but let me show you that this is what happens now when I get a 404, when I go to a path that doesn't exist, I get my 404 error, and it actually is a 404 in here. 404 not found. And I can go back to my page, and that works. But you see, this has no reference to article here, but article is available because of this middleware that I've used. So we can have middleware that is applied to every single request. We got a middleware that's handled maybe just a few requests. For example, I might need to do get article for if I'm going to try and edit an article. Should probably 404 if that article doesn't exist. If I'm going to try and post that edited article, I should probably put that there as well. If I'm going to delete, well, I'm going to need to make sure that article exists, so I'll put that one there as well. And this was, instead of me having to copy and paste, const articles equals database.articles with the request.params.id every route. So this is kind of what we were talking about. How do we save time? How do we make things more common? This is kind of one of the approaches I wanted to show you. Now there's one last thing. I keep saying that. Format distance to now. We want to make that function available. Let's just make it available to every template. Okay? Instead of passing it on the template vars here, we're going to make that function available by creating middleware. Every single request will add app response.locals dot format distance to now equals format distance to now, and then call next. This is a very simple middleware. Every request adds format distance to now to my locals, and then it just says keep working, so that when we get to the show function here, format distance to now is in the locals. It's available in the template. I don't have to put everything in my template vars because locals are available. Yes?
The locals are something that you define within your index, and because you're using EJS, like EJS and they duplicate somehow, and then you get that locals in there.
That's right. Yeah. So local there are app locals, which I won't talk about, but response.locals exists for the entire lifecycle of that request response. So when a request comes in, I can have multiple handlers handling that request, right? The locals will exist through that entire chain, and I can keep adding locals to it. And then at the end, when we do a render, those locals are hooked up to the template and available in the template. And I could also, I could use locals for that, and I could use locals. I could access the locals here. If I needed to grab existing data for this article, for example, get article, I could say response.locals.article, and that would give me the article that was found in my middleware instead. Like I have access to this here, and I have access to it in my templates. Okay. I want to end this now because it's been a long time. I'm going to have to figure out where to cut some. What are some recommendations?
I don't know, like I felt like most of the stuff, like honestly, man, like I wouldn't have been able to do a lot of this shit without this.
Right.
So I think this is kind of like, there's no way beating around it. Like this is a lot of content and a lot of stuff that like I wouldn't be able to do unless I've seen it.
Okay.
I would have been able to like figure it out, but probably a lot longer.
Okay. Yeah, like normally on Tuesday afternoons we would have a breakout, and it would fill in a lot of these gaps. We'd be able to just split this over two, so we don't have those afternoon official breakouts anymore. But maybe we can find some stuff in here that isn't as relevant, and then do more informal stuff if it's missing. I'm not sure what makes sense, but yeah, definitely too long for me. Too long.
I mean, like I don't know, maybe the stuff you could cut out would be like and it didn't even take that much time, but like the formatting and stuff, like, and maybe error checks.
Yeah. Yeah, I kept the error checks in there because of the one, it's something you're going to be running into. You're going to have to handle errors, 401, 403, 404s, and then also middleware. It's a big part of middleware, and I wanted to make sure we covered that a bit more. So,
Are we going to be using a decent amount of middleware for the Tiny app, or is that more later on?
you have there are a couple of features that you could either use it or not. As I showed you, I started by building the features without middleware, and then I switched it over to use middleware. So, for example, this here. Instead of copying and pasting this into every single route, I use the middleware instead. You have opportunities to do that with Tiny App, but you're not required to. Yeah. Yeah, it's more like this. This is more like what the code is doing. I'm not actually returning what next. I'm just stopping. I just want this code not to be called. This is creating a new error object. Yeah, it's a new error object. So normally when we want to create an error, we can say new error, error message, right? The error is something that you can extend that error. And so here I've taken the error and I've extended it and made an error 404 instead. And then here I've set it up so that when you call message on it, it returns the same thing all the time. It's my 404 error. And then it also has a status code. So that's all I'm doing there is new error 404 creates an instance of this object here, which has two functions, message and status code. Yeah. Right. So yeah. So we will check for the article. If the article is not there, we will call next, and we will stop executing this function. So we don't have to worry about the rest of this function after that, right? But when we call next with a parameter like this, which is an error, it gets handled down here. So when I say next new error 404, Express will pass that error to this function right here. This is my error handler middleware. And it checks to see if there is an error, and if there's an error, then it renders the error page with the error message. Okay? Instead of me doing that in my route I could say if article is undefined, then response.render error page or response.redirect to error page. A couple different options there. I've just sort of tried to centralize this using middleware instead to show what's possible. Yeah. You good? Okay. Thanks, everyone. Any further questions, message me on Slack. I know I threw a lot at you today. Appreciate the patience, and thanks for 3 hours. That was fun. I'll send the notes out now. Oh, and if you find any sort of grammar or spelling mistakes or any code mistakes in my notes, let me know, please, because it's the first time anyone else has read them. So it really helps me keep them up to date. Sure, yeah.
Function the get article, like yeah, anywhere. So
Where it uses it, or where?
yeah, here. So when you call next, right, it will actually do like this whole listener will be skipped. Is that right?
Yeah, so we called get article. It doesn't find an article, so it calls next with an error, which means this will not handle it anymore, because we don't have an error, like we're not handling errors here, right? So yeah, so when it's going to call next one of two ways, either with an error or not with an error. If it's not with an error, then it definitely will make it to the next function. But if it is with an error, then we want it to be handled by our generalized error handling method instead.
Okay.
New error 404 comes from here, or like we pass it through next to this function.
Okay.
Now we check to see is error true or not. It's truthy, yes it is, it's an object. Does error have a status code property? Which yes, it's the one that gives us the value for it. Then we call response. Now we're finishing the response. We're going to send it back to the user and say, status code is now 404. We're going to render the error page, which is HTML that has, you know, like GitHub has a 404 page, and people like to have their own 404 page. So we render that page, but we need to know what the message is, because this will actually handle any error. If I wanted to, I could create another error in here called so 401 is forbidden, or I think not authenticated, right? So this might be my message for an error 401, and the status code will just be, it'll return that status code of 401, and I just need to export this from here.
Yeah.
So now if I wanted to check to see, like for example, you try and delete something, the first thing I could do is say, well, I could actually move. I could do some authentication here as well. Let's say, so now this one, if everything's all good, it's just going to continue, right? Well, let's say if cookie user ID, like let's say if the cookie ID is null, like the user's not logged in. So this is just an example, I don't know, right? It's just saying, is the user logged in or not, right? If the user is not logged in, then what we want to do is return so that it doesn't continue handling this request and call next new error, new error 401. So now I can put this check off in front of any route that needs authentication. And so the first thing it'll do here is if I'm not authenticated, then it doesn't matter if the resource exists or not, because check off will send me to that error case. But if I am authenticated, then it'll do the get article, and if the article is there, then it'll show, then it'll render it. Otherwise, it'll show it, or it'll delete it. Otherwise, it'll show it. It'll send me a 404, right? So this, we chain these things together.
What if we have like an arrow? Like, what if we put an arrow, like have a look at the parameter? Will we be able to handle an arrow? No.
So let's check that out. Let's do it on the other one's going to be a bit easier because just getting this one's going to be a bit easier, right? So. Now, so get article should return next with an error, and this handles an error now. So let's see. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, it looks like those are only handled by the specific error handling middleware. Yeah. Which is sort of normal, because if this was the case, if I wanted to do it here, I could I'd either handle that right inside get article, which would be, the difference there would be instead of having this middleware pass it on, I would just say response.render error, right? Like I could just do that here. I don't have to pass it on if I don't want to, but by passing it on, it lets me define all of my specific error responses together if I want, or generalize it, right? Like here, I would have to do response render error 404 and one for 401 somewhere else and one for 403 somewhere else. So at least this way I've generalized that. I've said I've defined my errors with these classes, and then I can just use the class I need to represent the error that I've created, and then it gets sent back to the user in the same way every time.
So it's more like if we put some like stuff in the next new arrow flow forward, it will actually jump out of this.
Yeah, it'll stop handling with those normal events.
Yeah, and it will just move on, and after.
And it's possible that Express is looking for the type of that argument that's passed, or that next argument, right? So if I call next with an error, it might check to see that it is an error object. It might say, oh, is this an error object? If it is, then that means they want us to handle it with the error handler.
Okay.
Because I actually don't have any other reason to send data on next, but or
Yeah.
arguments on next.
Okay.
No problem.